There's a moment in Season 10 of South Park, Episode 7, aired May 3rd, 2006, where Caesar Millan, the dog whisperer, is standing in Leanne Cartman's living room, and he says something so simple it shouldn't land as hard as it does. He says, "See, I'm not looking at the child. I'm not acknowledging the child. I'm just letting the child know I'm not interested in him." And Cartman, this kid who has, by this point in the series, manipulated entire governments, started hate groups, driven multiple adults to institutional care, Cartman looks genuinely confused. Not angry, confused. Because for the first time in his life, someone in the room isn't reacting to him. And his face, which is 2 dots and a line on a construction paper circle, somehow communicates that confusion better than most live-action actors could, with a full range of facial muscles. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because that tiny moment, that half second of animation, is the kind of thing people miss when they talk about South Park. They remember the fart jokes. They remember Cartman screaming about cheesy poofs. They remember the crude animation and the shock value and the controversy. And all of that's real. All of that's part of it. But underneath it, threaded through almost 3 decades of episodes, there are these moments of pure, quiet, devastating brilliance that nobody talks about. Not the episodes everyone ranks on their top 10 lists. Not Scott Tenorman Must Die or Make Love Not Warcraft. Those are incredible, and we'll get to them, trust me. I'm talking about the stuff that happens in the margins. The joke that works on 4 levels, but only gets credit for 1. The character beat that changes everything if you're paying attention. The production decision that shouldn't work, but somehow reshapes what animation can be. That's what tonight is about. We're going to go through South Park's most genius moments, the ones nobody talks about. Not a top 10 list, not a ranking, more like a collection of things I can't stop thinking about. Some are famous episodes, seen from an angle you haven't considered. Some are blink and you miss it details, buried in episodes you've probably forgotten. Some are behind the scenes decisions that changed the show forever without anyone noticing. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a while. And if you haven't subscribed, it really does help us keep making these for you. Alright, let's talk about a show made of construction paper that somehow became one of the smartest things on television. Okay, so here's something that blows my mind every time I think about it. South Park premiered on August 13th, 1997. The first episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was animated using actual construction paper. Like physical paper, cut out by hand, moved frame by frame. Trey Parker and Matt Stone spent roughly 3 months making that one 22-minute episode. 3 months for a pilot that looked, and I mean this with all the love in the world, like something a particularly talented middle schooler might produce with scissors and a camera. And that's not an insult. That roughness, that handmade quality, it was the point. It was always the point. Critics at the time absolutely savaged it. The Hollywood Reporter called it dismissible juvenilia. Ginia Belafonte at Time magazine said it was devoid of subtext. Devoid of subtext. A show that would go on to dismantle Scientology, satirize the war on terror, and make the most devastating commentary on school shootings American television has ever produced. Devoid of subtext. But here's the thing that nobody talks about when they discuss South Park's animation. The crudeness isn't a limitation. It became a superpower. And I don't mean that in some abstract, philosophical way. I mean it practically, mechanically changed what the show could do and how fast it could do it. See, most animated shows, The Simpsons, Family Guy, even newer stuff, they operate on production cycles of 6 to 9 months per episode, sometimes longer. That means when something happens in the real world, they can't respond to it. They're locked into scripts that were written half a year ago. South Park, because of that deliberately crude style, because the animation is done digitally in a way that mimics the original paper cutouts, can produce an entire episode in 6 days. 6 days. From blank page to broadcast. And this isn't some secret. They literally made a documentary about it. 6 Days to Air premiered on October 9th, 2011, directed by Arthur Bradford, and it follows the production of the season 15 premiere, Human Centipede. The doc was nominated for an Emmy, and honestly, it should have won, because watching Trey Parker pace around a writer's room at 3 in the morning, absolutely exhausted, trying to figure out whether a joke about Steve Jobs works better as an A plot or a B plot, That's one of the most honest portrayals of the creative process I've ever seen. And I think people underestimate what that 6-day cycle actually means for the show's genius. It's not just speed, it's pressure. It's the elimination of second guessing. Trey Parker has said, and I'm paraphrasing from the documentary here, that more often than not, he's disappointed when an episode is finished. But he can't hold on to it for a day longer. It has to be turned in. And there's something in that, in the forced imperfection of the process, that keeps the show raw, keeps it dangerous. You can feel it when you watch South Park. There's an energy that other animated shows don't have. This sense that anything could happen, because the people making it barely had time to think about whether it should. Think about what that means in practice. On Tuesday, November 4th, 2008, Barack Obama won the presidential election. The very next night, Wednesday, November 5th, South Park aired About Last Night, an episode that depicted Obama's victory as part of an elaborate Ocean's 11 style heist. They wrote, animated, and delivered that episode in essentially real time. It was completed on the morning of its air date, hours after they typically finish. And yeah, they had considered preparing an alternate version in case McCain won, but found the prospect too daunting given their production schedule, so they bet on Obama winning based on the polling odds. That's insane. And it's only possible because of the bad animation. The crude style isn't a compromise. It's the entire reason the show can be what it is. That's the genius nobody talks about. Not individual jokes or storylines. The whole production philosophy. The decision to stay ugly was the smartest creative choice in the history of adult animation. But let me circle back to that Tst episode, because I think it contains something even more interesting than the Cesar Millan stuff. Look, the Millan plotline is great. Matt Stone has said in interviews that the idea for the episode came from his own love of the Dog Whisperer, and he genuinely believed Millan's methods would work on a child as well as they would a dog. The real Cesar Millan actually loved the episode, saying the writers clearly did their homework. But the moment that kills me isn't any of the Dog Whisperer scenes. It's the ending. After Millan's training works, after Cartman actually transforms into a well-behaved, thoughtful kid who does his homework and eats healthy breakfasts, Millan pays a final visit, and Leanne, Cartman's mom, asks him if he wants to see Madame Butterfly with her, and he says no. He's just there professionally. She's a client. And in that moment, you see something flash across Leanne Cartman's face that the show has never shown before. Loneliness. Real, adult, devastating loneliness. This woman whose entire identity has been wrapped up in either spoiling her son or engaging in, let's say, extracurricular activities. She has no one. Millan was the closest thing to a real relationship she'd had, and he's walking away. So she turns to Cartman and asks if he wants to go with her instead. And when he hesitates, she offers to buy him a Mega Ranger. 2 of them, whatever he wants. And in the final shot, and I swear this is some of the best visual storytelling the show has ever done, Cartman's face shifts. It's this slow, unsettling smile. The good Cartman is gone. Not because anyone forced him back, but because his mother's loneliness demanded it. She needed him to be the monster, so she wouldn't have to face being alone. And here's the thing, the show never explicitly says any of this. There's no Kyle speech at the end. No, I learned something today. It's all in that final shot. 2 dots, a line, and a curve on a construction paper circle, and it tells you everything about why Eric Cartman is the way he is. You could write an entire psychology textbook chapter about what that ending implies, about codependent parent-child relationships, about enablement, about the cycle of dysfunction. And they did it with construction paper in 6 days. I mean, come on. Alright, let me take you somewhere completely different now, because there's another kind of genius South Park does that doesn't get enough credit, and it's the way they handle musical numbers. And I'm not talking about Blame Canada from the 1999 movie, bigger, longer, and uncut, even though that song was literally nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. I'm talking about the way Trey Parker uses music inside the show to do things that most television writers wouldn't even attempt. Let me give you an example that still gets me. Season 15, Episode 7, You're Getting Old, aired June 8th, 2011. It was the mid-season finale, and on paper, the plot sounds like standard South Park absurdity. Stan turns 10 and starts perceiving everything, music, movies, food, as literal shit. Like, visually and auditorily, everything becomes excrement to him. The show diagnoses him as being a cynical asshole. Classic South Park setup, right? Except this episode doesn't play it for laughs. Or rather, it plays it for laughs. And then, in the final 3 minutes, does something the show had never done before. After an episode of watching Stan lose his friends, his enjoyment of life, and his connection to everything he used to love, the show cuts to a montage. No dialogue, just images. Sharon and Randy sitting on opposite sides of the couch, clearly done with each other. Stan walking through a park alone. Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny hanging out without him. Randy packing boxes. And over all of it, they play Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. And I need you to understand, the production team wasn't even sure they could use that song until the night before the episode aired. Parker has said they had backup songs ready, but none of them fit. They got clearance at the last possible moment. And thank God they did, because when Stevie Nicks' voice comes in over footage of the Marsh family falling apart, it doesn't feel like South Park anymore. It feels like something from a prestige drama. It feels like watching someone's childhood end in real time. I remember when this aired, the internet lost its mind. Not because it was funny, it wasn't really. Not in the way South Park usually is, but because nobody could figure out if it was a series finale. Entertainment Weekly pointed out that the episode could be a not-so-thinly veiled way of Stone and Parker telling us they had a similar discussion about their very show. And there was some basis for that interpretation. In a Hollywood Reporter profile from March 2011, Parker and Stone had said about returning to South Park production, "I don't know how we're going to do it. It's a nightmare." Fans spent the entire summer of 2011 wondering if that was the end. If Trey and Matt had finally gotten too old, too cynical, too tired of their own creation. It was 5 months before the next episode aired. 5 months of wondering. And then, Asperger's hit on October 5th, 2011, the mid-season premiere, and it picked up right where You're Getting Old left off. Stan still depressed, still seeing everything as shit. But Parker and Stone were honest about the production situation in their DVD commentary. Parker summarized the first writers' meeting after the hiatus as the team wondering, now what the hell do we do? They hadn't planned an ending for this arc. They'd written You're Getting Old without knowing how to resolve it. And the solution they came up with is, I think, one of the most brutally honest things the show has ever done. At the end of Asperger's, everything resets. Stan's parents get back together. Kyle drops his business with Cartman. The town goes back to normal. It's the South Park status quo, fully restored. Except for one thing. In the very final shot, Stan wakes up the next morning, and before he goes out to meet his friends, he opens a drawer and pulls out a bottle of Jameson Irish whiskey. He takes a swig, and then he walks out the door, and Landslide plays again. That's it. That's the resolution. The show goes back to normal, but Stan has started drinking to cope with the numbness. A 10-year-old taking a swig of whiskey before school because it's the only way he can stand to exist in a world that looks like shit to him. And the show doesn't comment on it, doesn't moralize, so doesn't have Kyle deliver a speech. It just shows you and moves on. And if you've ever felt what Stan feels in that moment, if you've ever smiled through a day you couldn't feel, if you've ever used something to take the edge off just so the world doesn't seem so relentlessly empty, that ending doesn't just land, it detonates. I still think about that bottle of Jameson. I think about it more than I think about almost anything else South Park has done, and I've been thinking about it a lot while making this video. Here's something else I want to talk about, and it's going to sound like a weird tangent, but stick with me. I want to talk about The Counter. You know the one. Season 5, Episode 1, It Hits the Fan. First aired June 20th, 2001. The premise? A fictional TV drama says the word shit uncensored, and the entire country goes nuts repeating it, leading to a literal plague. The word shit is said 162 times in 22 minutes. They put an on-screen counter in the corner to track every instance, an average of once every 8 seconds. Now, the obvious genius here is the meta commentary. Comedy Central, South Park's own network, had initially refused to let the show say shit uncensored in smaller quantities. But when Parker and Stone came back with the idea to say it over 160 times, Comedy Central was somehow fine with it. The executives felt the profanity was justified by context. And Matt Stone later said, with perfect deadpan, no one cares anymore. The standards are almost gone. No one gives a shit or a bullshit. The episode was named number 8 on Comedy Central's 10 South Parks That Changed the World Marathon in 2006, and it hit number 93 on TV Land's Top 100 Most Unexpected Moments in TV History. But the genius nobody talks about isn't the word count or the meta commentary. It's the counter itself. Think about what that counter does to the viewing experience. it turns the audience into participants. You're not just watching a joke about overusing profanity. You're tracking it. You're anticipating the next one. You're aware of the accumulation. It transforms a passive experience into an active one, and it does it with the simplest possible visual tool, a number in the corner of the screen. That's a production decision, not a writing decision. Someone in the room said, "What if we counted them?" And that one idea turned a funny episode into a television event. It turned viewers into accomplices. You're not offended by the 160-second shit because you helped to get there. You counted along. I actually have a theory about this that I've never seen anyone else bring up. I think the counter in It Hits the Fan is one of the earliest examples of what we now call gamification in television. Before second screen experiences, before live tweet events, before interactive Netflix specials, South Park put a number on screen and turned watching TV into a game. And they did it in 2001, years before anyone was talking about audience engagement metrics or participatory storytelling. I don't think Parker and Stone were thinking about any of that. I think they just thought a counter would be funny. But that's how the best innovations work, right? Someone does something for a laugh and accidentally invents a new way of experiencing media. All right, I need to talk about Scott Tenorman Must Die now, because I know it's on every best of list. I know everyone's seen it. I know you're thinking, come on, this is the most talked about South Park episode ever. And you're right, but I want to talk about the one thing nobody ever mentions about it, and it's a production detail that changes how I see the whole episode. So here's the context. Scott Tenorman Must Die is the 4th episode of Season 5, the 69th episode of the series overall. It aired July 11th, 2001, written by Trey Parker, directed by Eric Stowe. The plot: a 9th grader named Scott Tenorman scams Cartman out of $16 by selling him something he doesn't need. And Cartman's revenge escalates until he feeds Scott his own parents in a bowl of chili. It's the episode that turned Cartman from a spoiled brat into, as Parker and Stone put it, the most evil kid in the world. It's got a 9.6 on IMDb, one of the highest rated television episodes of all time. Any genre, any show. Rolling Stone listed the final reveal as the 2nd best South Park moment ever. Now here's the thing nobody talks about. By production order, this was actually the first episode produced for Season 5. Production code 501. It was pushed back to the 4th slot after It Hits the Fan was written and deemed a stronger season premiere. And according to the Wikipedia page, which cites the DVD commentary extensively, Parker and Stone actually didn't like the episode much while they were making it. The specific problem? They couldn't come up with a B story. Every previous South Park episode had run multiple plot lines that converged in the 3rd act. This was the first time they tried to sustain a single storyline for the entire episode, and they weren't sure it worked. Think about that. The episode that redefined Cartman. The episode that set the standard for the show's psychopathic humor for the next 20 plus years. The episode that's consistently voted one of the greatest in television history. The creators didn't like it while they were making it. And the reason they didn't like it, the single plot structure, is exactly what made it great. The lack of a B story meant every single minute was dedicated to the escalation of Cartman's revenge. There was no comic relief subplot to cut away to. No Kenny side adventure, just an unbroken, mounting spiral of increasingly unhinged schemes, building toward a reveal that still makes your jaw drop even when you know it's coming. Parker and Stone accidentally discovered that the single story format worked better for certain types of episodes, and they've used it selectively ever since. One of the most important structural innovations in the show's history, and it happened because they couldn't figure out a B plot. And there's another detail that kills me. The props in the episode, the stuff Cartman buys from Scott, were actually made from scanned-in hairs from the back of the neck of Adrian Beard, South Park's lead storyboarder, because of course they were. And Radiohead, the actual band, guest starred in the episode voicing themselves. And Parker later talked about how recording their lines was a challenge because Tom York, who is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most emotionally expressive singers of his generation, struggled to emote properly when reading scripted lines for a cartoon. The irony of directing the man who wrote Creep and Everything in Its Right Place to put more emotion into it while voicing himself in a show about a 9-year-old eating his parents in chili. I mean, honestly, that's its own kind of genius. Just not the kind anyone talks about. Oh, and one more thing about Scott Tenorman Must Die that genuinely changed how I see the show. The original shooting script said that after Scott burns Cartman's money, Cartman would fall down on the muddy lawn and use the mud to put war paint on his face. like William Wallace in Braveheart. They cut that. And the scene where Cartman draws up his elaborate revenge plans? In the script, it was supposed to be revealed that his intense, scheming drawing was just a stupid crayon drawing of a pony. They moved that pony drawing to an earlier scene instead. These are tiny changes, but they're the difference between Cartman being a punchline and Cartman being terrifying. The finished episode treats his revenge with complete seriousness. There's no deflation, no winking at the camera. He means it. He means every second of it. And that restraint, that refusal to undercut the darkness with a joke, is what made the character. You know what's funny? I've rewatched this episode probably 20 times in the last few years, across all the work I've done on this channel, and I still catch new things. Like the fact that Kenny dies in this episode by laughing too hard at the video of Cartman doing the piggy dance. He literally laughs himself to death. And in the original broadcast, there was no visible ghost of Kenny floating away. That was added for the rerun the following Saturday. Minor modifications like that happen on South Park regularly because of the insane production timeline. They're literally fixing episodes after they air. Let me shift gears to something I think about constantly, and it's a moment from an episode that gets talked about a lot, but usually for the wrong reasons. Make Love, Not Warcraft. Season 10, Episode 8, aired October 4th, 2006. Everyone remembers this one. The boys spend months grinding their World of Warcraft characters to defeat an overpowered griefer. They get fat and gross in the process, and it's all rendered in a mix of traditional South Park animation and machinima captured inside the actual game. The episode won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2007, beating out SpongeBob SquarePants, and it was voted the #1 South Park episode ever in a 2011 fan vote. Parker and Stone listed it as their third favorite episode of the series in 2015. And yes, all of that is incredible. But what nobody talks about is the production timeline. The collaboration between South Park Studios and Blizzard Entertainment started on September 1st, 2006. That's when they had their first production meeting about the episode. The actual machinima shooting was done in 5 shooting days, the first being September 20th, lasting about 3 to 5 hours, and the last being October 3rd, one day before the episode aired. The regular South Park animation was being created simultaneously, so they were producing 2 completely different types of animation: their standard 2D style and fully rendered 3D machinima sequences at the same time. And the whole thing came together less than 24 hours before broadcast. Blizzard gave them access to a private alpha server for the upcoming expansion, The Burning Crusade, so they could film without spoiling content for actual players. Several Blizzard employees, including cinematics artist Joey Ray Hall, whose physical appearance actually inspired the design of the episode's griefer character, relocated temporarily to South Park Studios in Los Angeles to help with the production. They provided character models, environments, everything. And Parker and Stone were, by their own account in the DVD commentary, completely shocked that Blizzard agreed to participate at all. Here's what gets me though. The episode took 3 full weeks of total production, an eternity by South Park standards, where the norm is 6 days, 3 weeks, and the regular season's still running around it. They were producing normal episodes in the standard 6-day cycle while simultaneously building this entirely different kind of show inside of World of Warcraft. That's like running a marathon while also competing in a chess tournament. The logistics alone should have been impossible, and the episode doesn't just work, it's one of the best things they've ever made. The live-action style reveal of the griefer, this overweight, acne-covered man in a grimy apartment, is still one of the funniest single shots in the show's history. It draws 3.4 million viewers on its first broadcast, making it Comedy Central's highest-rated mid-season premiere since the year 2000. But here's the moment from that episode that I think is genuinely brilliant and that nobody discusses. It's the training montage. The boys decide to level up by killing boars in the forest, the most boring, tedious activity possible in World of Warcraft, and they play Paul Stanley's Live to Win over it. And the montage goes on for what feels like forever. And during it, the boys transform physically. They gain weight, they get acne, they stop going outside. And the montage plays all of this completely straight. It's not ironic. It's not winking at you. It treats the grinding of virtual boars with the same dramatic weight that Rocky treats training for a boxing match. And that's the joke. The sincerity is the satire. By refusing to comment on how absurd it is, By treating World of Warcraft with absolute narrative seriousness, the episode exposes the absurdity more effectively than any explicit mockery could. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think this technique, playing absurdity completely straight, is South Park's single most powerful comedic tool. It's how they handle almost everything. Scientology, school shootings, American politics. They don't satirize by exaggerating. They satirize by presenting things as they are, with total sincerity, and letting the audience do the work of recognizing the absurdity. And Make Love Not Warcraft is the purest expression of that approach I've ever seen. Okay, I want to take a left turn now and talk about something that I genuinely believe is one of the most important creative decisions in the history of the show, and it's a decision that almost nobody ever mentions. I'm talking about the way South Park handles its child characters as actual children. Look, most animated shows with kid protagonists, The Simpsons, Recess, Hey Arnold, use childhood as a setting, but not really as a perspective. The kids in those shows are, for the most part, miniature adults. They understand adult concepts. They navigate adult situations with adult reasoning, and the comedy comes from the contrast between their age and their maturity. South Park does something different. South Park's kids are genuinely, recognizably children. They don't understand what's happening around them most of the time. They misinterpret everything. They approach adult problems with the logic of 8-year-olds, and the show treats that gap between their understanding and reality as a source of both comedy and heartbreak. Think about it. When the boys learn about sex education and proper condom use, that's Season 5, Episode 7, aired August 1st, 2001. Mr. Mackie hasn't had sex in over 20 years, so his instruction is useless. Ms. Chalks-and-Dick terrifies the girls with descriptions of STDs without explaining how they're transmitted. And the result is that the boys and girls descend into a Mad Max-style war because they genuinely believe the other gender is going to give them diseases. It's hilarious on the surface, but underneath it, it's a devastatingly accurate portrayal of how children process information they're not ready for. They don't get it wrong because they're stupid. They get it wrong because they're kids. And the adults in their lives have failed them completely. And that's a through line that runs through the entire series. The adults in South Park are, almost without exception, worse than useless. They're panicky, hypocritical, self-absorbed, and completely unable to guide their children through anything. Randy Marsh is the most obvious example, a geologist who has transformed over the course of the series from a mild-mannered background character into what might be the most absurd adult male on television. But it's not just Randy, it's every parent, every teacher, every authority figure. They're all broken, and the kids have to navigate a world run by broken people using nothing but the limited tools of childhood. And that's where South Park's real emotional depth lives. Not in the shock value, not in the satire, in the gap between what children understand and what they need to understand. That gap is where all the best moments of the show exist. I want to give you an example that I think about a lot. The Mysterion arc across seasons 13 and 14, but specifically the moment in Coon vs. Coon and Friends. Season 14, Episode 13 aired November 10th, 2010, where Kenny, as the hooded vigilante Mysterion, reveals his secret. Not his identity, which everyone already knows. His actual secret, that he dies and comes back every time, and no one ever remembers. He wakes up in his bed the next morning, alive, and no one around him has any memory that he died. Now, Kenny dying is the oldest running gag in the show. It's been happening since the pilot, and for years, it was just that, a gag. Kid dies, friends react, he's back next episode, no explanation. But in this arc, the show retroactively gives that gag devastating emotional weight. Kenny doesn't just die as a punchline. He dies knowing it will happen. He dies knowing it will hurt. He dies knowing that tomorrow, everyone will have forgotten, and he'll have to live with the memory alone. That's not a joke. That's a horror story. And it was hiding inside a running gag for 13 years. And the show goes further. It reveals that whenever Kenny dies, his mom gives birth to a new Kenny. The cosmic mechanism of his immortality is his parents having sex and producing a new child. It's grotesque, it's absurd, and it's also genuinely tragic. This kid is trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth that no one else can perceive or acknowledge. He can't talk about it because no one believes him. He can't escape it because the universe won't let him. And the show wraps all of this inside a superhero parody that's simultaneously making fun of the Dark Knight and calling out Cartman's narcissism. I'm sorry, but that is some of the most sophisticated layered storytelling I've ever seen in animation. And it happens in a show where the main character once started a chili cook-off to feed a kid his own parents. The range is insane. Speaking of range, and I know I keep jumping around, but that's kind of how my brain works with this show. And honestly, it's kind of how the show itself works. I want to talk about Trapped in the Closet, Season 9, Episode 12. Aired November 16th, 2005. Written and directed by Trey Parker. Credited as, and this part is important, John Smith. Every single name in the end credits of that episode is listed as either John Smith or Jane Smith. Everyone. The animators, the producers, the voice actors, all John and Jane Smith. Because the episode goes after Scientology, and Parker and Stone knew what that meant. Now, most people remember this episode for the Tom Cruise closet gag. Stan tells Cruise his acting is just okay. Cruise locks himself in Stan's closet and refuses to come out. And the show spends the rest of the episode asking Tom Cruise to please come out of the closet. It's a double entendre, so obvious it circles back around to being genius. But the real genius of Trapped in the Closet isn't the Cruise stuff, it's the Xenu stuff. The episode includes a sequence where the president of Scientology tells Stan the origin story of the religion, the Xenu narrative, where a galactic warlord brings billions of beings to Earth 75 million years ago and detonates them with hydrogen bombs. And at the bottom of the screen, in plain white text, the show displays, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." That caption exists because when the show had previously done a similar treatment of Mormon beliefs in All About Mormons, some viewers assumed Parker and Stone had made the beliefs up for comedic effect. They hadn't. And with Trapped in the Closet, they wanted to make absolutely clear, this isn't parody. This is what the church teaches at the OT3 level. Every detail is accurate. The day after the episode aired, November 17th, 2005, Scientology executive Mike Rinder wrote a memo to church leader David Miscavige. The memo stated that the program was a total J&D, joking and degrading, of Scientology, Tom Cruise, and John Travolta, and contains upper-level data. The church launched an investigation into Parker and Stone that included monitoring their workplace, cataloging their cars' license plates, and tracking their catering service. A former high-level Scientologist later leaked documents detailing the scope of the surveillance operation. And then there's what happened to Isaac Hayes. Hayes, the legendary soul musician, had voiced Chef since the show's first episode. He was a practicing Scientologist. And in March 2006, a statement was released in his name announcing his departure from the show, criticizing the creators for their intolerance and bigotry of religious beliefs. Stone responded by saying, "In 10 years and over 150 episodes of South Park, Isaac never had a problem with the show making fun of Christians, Muslims, Mormons, or Jews. He got a sudden case of religious sensitivity when it was his religion featured on the show." But here's where it gets complicated and genuinely sad. After Hayes' death in 2008, his son Isaac Hayes III told The Hollywood Reporter in a 2016 interview that his father had suffered a stroke and was in no condition to make the decision to leave the show. His son said the resignation statement must have come from one of Hayes' assistants, all of whom were Scientologists. So the church may have forced Hayes out without his knowledge or consent. The man who gave us Chef, who sang about making sweet love by the fire, was taken from the show by the very organization that the show had been brave enough to criticize. And South Park's response was The Return of Chef, the Season 10 premiere, where Chef's dialogue was stitched together from pre-recorded snippets of previous episodes, and the character was written out by being struck by lightning, burned, impaled, and mauled to death by both a mountain lion and a grizzly bear, before being resurrected as a Darth Vader-type figure. Even in mourning a character and dealing with a real-world betrayal, South Park couldn't help being the most South Park version of itself. And I don't think they handled it perfectly. There's a cruelty to the way Chef was killed off that probably crossed a line, especially knowing Hayes wasn't in full control of the situation. But there's also something fiercely principled about it. They lost a friend and a cast member because they refused to grant Scientology the special treatment it demanded. The credits gag, the John Smith credits, was their way of protecting everyone involved from potential legal harassment. It was funny, but it was also, quietly, an act of solidarity with their team. If you come after one of us, You come after all of us, and you won't be able to tell us apart. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a video about a cartoon show. Let me tell you about another genius moment that's been living in my head rent-free. It's from Imagination Land, the 3-part epic that spans episodes 10, 11, and 12 of season 11. The first part aired October 17th, 2007. Now, this trilogy is famous. It won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program for programming 1 hour or more in 2008. It was originally conceived as a theatrical sequel to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, the show's 1999 movie, before Parker and Stone decided it wasn't a big enough idea for a feature film. The decision to make it a trilogy happened the Monday before the first episode aired. Parker told the AV Club that he completed the rest of the trilogy's story by that Thursday morning, writing every beat of part 2 and 3 in one sitting. For one of the most ambitious storylines in the show's history. A storyline that manages to be simultaneously a commentary on terrorism, government overreaction, the nature of imagination, and whether Kyle has to follow through on the most humiliating bet in South Park history because he lost a wager about leprechauns. Production began 3 months before the first episode aired, an eternity by South Park standards. They used 24 and Battlestar Galactica as structural templates. And the whole thing works because it never once forgets that it's a show about 8-year-old boys. But the genius moment I want to highlight isn't any of the epic stuff. It's Butters. Throughout the trilogy, Butters is trapped in Imagination Land after a terrorist attack. Yes, terrorists attack the land of imagination. And yes, it's exactly as insane as it sounds. And while the US government prepares to nuke Imagination Land to stop the evil imaginary characters from escaping, Butters is told that he's the only one who can save everyone. He's the key, and he doesn't understand why. He's just Butters. He's the kid who gets grounded for everything, who's manipulated by Cartman constantly, who's the punching bag of the group. Why would he be the one to save Imagination Land? And the answer is beautiful and never explicitly stated. Butters can save Imagination Land because he still believes in imagination without reservation. He's not cynical like Stan. He's not angry like Kyle. He's not scheming like Cartman. He's the last truly innocent character on the show. And that innocence is what gives him power in a realm built on the strength of belief. The weakest character in South Park is the strongest character in Imagination Land, and the show lets you figure that out for yourself. I think about that inversion a lot, about how South Park, a show famous for its cynicism, for its everything is equally stupid worldview, chose to make sincerity the most powerful force in its most ambitious storyline. That says something about what Parker and Stone actually believe. Beneath all the crude jokes and shock value, they believe in imagination. They believe in the value of not being cynical. They just have a very weird way of showing it. And you know what? Let me stay with Butters for a minute, because I think he might be the show's secret weapon. There's a moment, and this is from Raisins, Season 7, Episode 14, aired December 10th, 2003, where Butters gets his heart broken by a girl from the Hooters-style restaurant. And at the end of the episode, the boys find him crying in the rain. And Stan, who's been going through his own breakup with Wendy, and has spent the whole episode falling into a goth spiral, tries to relate. And Butters says something that, honest to God, might be the most emotionally intelligent line in the entire series. He says, and I'm paraphrasing from memory here because I want to be careful about exact quotes, but the gist is, he'd rather be sad than not feel anything at all. He'd rather have a sad heart than an empty one. He's not going to shut himself off from feeling just because feeling hurts sometimes. The pain is part of being alive, and he'd rather be alive and hurting than numb and safe. And it's Butters who says this. Butters. The most abused, most overlooked, most consistently victimized character in the show. The kid whose parents ground him for literally everything. The kid Cartman manipulates as a matter of routine. And he's the one who understands, at age 8, something that most adults never figure out. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That emotional openness, even when it causes pain, is the whole point. I've rewatched that scene probably 10 times putting this together. And every time, I think, this show made with construction paper cutouts. This show that once had a kid eat his own parents in Chile. This show that says shit 162 times in a single episode. This show just articulated a philosophy of emotional resilience that most self-help books can't manage in 30 seconds through a character named Butters. I can't get over it. I genuinely can't. Alright, let me take you into some production territory that I find endlessly fascinating, and it's about the evolution of South Park's animation. Because most people think of South Park's visual style as static, construction paper kids, simple backgrounds, crude movements. But the show has undergone one of the most dramatic visual transformations in animation history, and it happened so gradually that almost nobody noticed. That first episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was animated with actual physical paper, cut out, moved by hand, photographed frame by frame. It took 3 months, and it remains the only South Park episode animated largely without computer technology. By the second episode, the show had transitioned to computer animation using Power Animator, and by the 5th season, they'd switched to Maya, Autodesk's professional 3D animation software, which they still use today. But, and this is the crucial part, they use Maya to create animation that looks like construction paper cutouts. They digitally recreate an analog aesthetic. Every character still has that flat, paper-like quality. Every movement still has that slightly jerky, cutout feel. The backgrounds still look like they were drawn by hand, but none of it is. It's all digital. It's all precise. It's all deliberate. And this is where it gets interesting, because as the tools got more sophisticated, the show started doing things that actual paper never could. Fire effects became realistic in Season 5, starting with It Hits the Fan, which used computer-generated fire instead of the paper-style fire from earlier seasons. Water effects improved. Camera movements became smoother. Crowd scenes got larger. The show's visual vocabulary expanded while its aesthetics stayed the same. It's like watching a musician master their instrument. The notes are the same, but the range is completely different. There's a specific visual technique that South Park uses that I've never seen anyone discuss, and I think it's genuinely innovative. The show relies on what I'd call emotional minimalism, because the characters' faces are so simple. Dots for eyes, a line for a mouth, the tiniest change in expression carries enormous weight. When Cartman's eyebrows shift half an inch, it communicates more than a full facial animation rig could. When Stan's mouth goes from a flat line to a slight downturn, you feel it in your chest. The constraint forces the animators to be precise in ways that more detailed animation doesn't require. Think about it this way. In a Pixar film, a character's face might have hundreds of control points for expression. A sad scene might involve the eyebrows lifting, the corners of the mouth pulling down, the eyes getting wider, maybe some quivering in the lip. It's incredible technology, and it works beautifully. But in South Park, you get a line moving. That's it. A flat, geometric shape rearranging itself by a few pixels. And somehow it works just as well, sometimes better, because your brain fills in the gap. You project emotion onto those minimal shapes because the writing has already told you what the character is feeling, and your imagination does the rest. It's the opposite of realistic animation, and it's just as effective. This is why I always push back when people call South Park's animation lazy or bad. It's neither. It's a specific, deliberate artistic choice that enables things no other animated show can do. The speed, the responsiveness, the emotional minimalism, the gap between what you see and what you feel. It's all connected. And it all traces back to 2 guys who couldn't afford anything better than construction paper in 1997 and accidentally created the most efficient storytelling engine in television animation. Let me talk about another thing that hides in plain sight with this show. The way South Park uses repetition. Not in the obvious way, not Kenny dying every episode or Cartman saying, "Screw you guys, I'm going home." I'm talking about structural repetition. The way certain ideas, themes, and character dynamics recur across seasons, sometimes years apart, building meaning through accumulation rather than explicit reference. Here's an example. There's a pattern across the series where Kyle delivers end-of-episode moral speeches, the "I learned something today" format. In the early seasons, these speeches are sincere. Kyle genuinely means what he says, and the show plays it straight. But over time, the speeches become ironic. The moral doesn't match the chaos that preceded it. Or the moral is obviously wrong. Or nobody's listening. And by the later seasons, the speeches have largely disappeared, replaced by ambiguity, unanswered questions, or straight-up nihilism. The show's entire moral framework evolved through the slow, almost imperceptible degradation of a single recurring structure. And I don't think most viewers consciously noticed it happening. They just felt the show getting darker, getting more complex. getting more honest about the fact that neat moral conclusions are a lie we tell children. And that ties directly into the larger argument I think South Park makes across its entire run, that certainty is the enemy of understanding. The show attacks people who are sure they're right, activists, politicians, religions, corporations, not because their positions are always wrong, but because the certainty itself is dangerous. The both sides are equally bad criticism that gets leveled at Parker, and Stone misses the point. They're not saying both sides are equally bad. They're saying both sides are equally certain. And that certainty, that refusal to entertain doubt, is what leads to the worst human impulses. The show's villains aren't the people with bad ideas. They're the people who never question their ideas. And the irony, of course, is that saying everything deserves to be questioned is itself a position of certainty. And South Park, to its credit, has occasionally questioned that too. The You're Getting Old arc is basically the show asking itself, what happens when you've been questioning everything for so long that you can't enjoy anything? What happens when cynicism becomes its own prison? And the answer is a 10-year-old drinking whiskey before school. Heavy stuff for a cartoon, right? I want to loop back to something I said earlier about production decisions being their own kind of genius, because there's one more I want to highlight, and it's about the show's sound design. Specifically, Trey Parker voicing most of the cast. This is something everyone knows in the abstract. Parker voices Cartman, Stan, Randy, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Butters, Jimmy, Craig, Clyde, and dozens of other characters. Matt Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters' dad, Pip, and others. Between the two of them, they cover the vast majority of the show's speaking parts. But here's what I want you to think about. When Cartman argues with Kyle, you're hearing one guy having an argument with another guy. But when Cartman argues with Stan, or when Randy talks to Mr. Garrison, or when Butters talks to literally anyone, you're hearing one guy having a conversation with himself. One guy sitting in a recording booth, switching between voices, often in the same sentence. And the voices are distinct enough that you never notice. Mr. Mackey's MK doesn't sound anything like Cartman's whining, doesn't sound anything like Randy's panicked screaming, doesn't sound anything like Craig's monotone. They're all Trey Parker. They're all one person's vocal range, deployed with enough variety that they feel like an entire town's worth of distinct individuals. And here's the production implication that nobody talks about. Because Parker voices so many characters, he can change dialogue on the fly. He can rewrite a line, walk into the recording booth, and lay it down himself within minutes. He doesn't have to schedule a voice actor. He doesn't have to coordinate availability. He doesn't have to explain his intention to someone else and hope they deliver it correctly. The speed of the show's production is partly possible because the creative vision and the vocal performance are the same person. Parker writes the line and then becomes the character who says it, with no translation layer in between. It's the most efficient creative pipeline I've ever seen. And it exists because two broke college kids couldn't afford to hire voice actors. Alright, I've been going for a while now, and I want to make sure I get to some of the specific episodes and moments that I think are genius level, but genuinely underappreciated. So let me rattle through some of these. The Losing Edge, Season 9, Episode 5. The boys are playing Little League Baseball, and they hate it. They want to lose so they can have their summer back. But every other team has the same plan. So the episode becomes about trying to lose, and it's built around a sports movie structure where the dramatic tension is reversed. You're rooting against the protagonists. That inversion is so simple and so perfect that I'm shocked no other show had done it first. And the B-plot has Randy Marsh getting into fights at every game as an aggressive sports dad, which is one of the first signs of Randy's transformation from straight man to the show's most chaotic character. Breast Cancer Show Ever, Season 12, Episode 9, aired October 15th, 2008. Wendy decides to fight Cartman after he mocks her breast cancer presentation. The entire episode is a countdown to the fight, and Cartman, the toughest talker in the school, spends the whole episode trying desperately to get out of it. He tries playing the victim. He tries apologizing insincerely. He lies to her parents. He tries to get detention on purpose. And when the fight finally happens, Wendy absolutely destroys him. And the show doesn't play it for laughs. It plays it for catharsis. After 12 seasons of watching Cartman get away with everything, watching a girl beat the absolute hell out of him while the entire school watches is genuinely satisfying. It's a payoff that took years to build. Quest for Ratings, Season 8, Episode 11, aired November 17th, 2004. The boys create a school news show and can't get anyone to watch it. This one is special because it's openly autobiographical. Parker and Stone were exhausted from just finishing Team America, World Police, and the episode is basically about how hard it is to create episodic content. The boys' struggle to come up with ideas for their show mirrors the writer's struggle to come up with ideas for their show. It's not meta in the annoying way. It's meta in the honest way. You can feel the exhaustion coming through the screen. A Nightmare on FaceTime, Season 16, Episode 12, aired October 24th, 2012. Randy buys a Blockbuster Video at the dawn of online streaming and slowly goes insane in a pitch-perfect Shining parody. Stan can't go trick-or-treating because his dad won't let him leave the store, so his friends strap an iPad to a skateboard so he can virtually join them as an Avenger. The commentary on streaming versus physical media, on generational fear of technological change, on the way capitalism clings to dead business models. It's all razor sharp, and the Shining homage isn't just a reference. It's a structural template that gives the episode a mounting dread that South Park rarely attempts. Dead Kids, Season 22, Episode 1, aired September 26th, 2018. This one is brutal. The conceit is simple and devastating. School shootings have become so normalized in America that the adults in South Park barely notice them. Multiple active shooter events happen at the school during the episode, and nobody reacts except Sharon Marsh, who becomes increasingly hysterical while everyone around her treats her concern as irrational. Randy is more worried about a rusty playground than the shootings. Teachers continue class during active shooter drills. It's one of the most savage pieces of satire the show has ever produced, and it works because it doesn't exaggerate. It barely even satirizes. It just presents the American response to school shootings with absolute fidelity and lets the horror speak for itself. And that's the thing, right? That's the thread connecting all of these moments. South Park's genius isn't in its shock value, it's in its clarity. When the show is at its best, it strips away the noise around a subject, the spin, the outrage, the political posturing, and shows you the thing itself. Sometimes what's underneath is absurd, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's heartbreaking, and sometimes, like with Dead Kids, it's so straightforwardly horrifying that you can't believe you needed a cartoon to show it to you. Let me tell you about one more thing, and then I think we can start wrapping up. It's about the Paramount Plus deal. In August 2021, Parker and Stone signed a deal with Paramount Global worth a reported $900 million. The deal included new seasons of the show extending through at least 2027 and 14 made-for-streaming movies. $900 million. For a show that started as a paper cutout. For a show that a Time magazine critic said was devoid of subtext in 1997. And you know what? I think the most genius thing about the deal isn't the money. It's what it represented. It meant that Trey Parker and Matt Stone, after 25 years of making a show on the most insane production schedule in television history, had accumulated enough leverage to essentially guarantee their creative freedom indefinitely. Nobody at Paramount is going to tell them what they can and can't do. Nobody's going to pull a trapped in the closet on them again. They earned the right to say whatever they want, about whoever they want, for as long as they want to keep making the show. And they earned it by being the guys who couldn't afford real animation. I think about that a lot, about how the limitations of South Park, the crude animation, the tiny budget, the breakneck production schedule, the two guys who do everything themselves, aren't obstacles that the show overcame. They're the show itself. They're the source of its genius. Every supposed weakness became a strength. Every constraint became a creative advantage. The animation is crude, so they can work fast. They work fast, so they can be topical. They're topical, so they're relevant. They're relevant, so they endure. And they endure because, underneath all the shock and controversy and toilet humor, they're telling the truth about what it feels like to be alive in the stupidest possible timeline. And here's where I'll leave you tonight. I keep coming back to that shot from the final frame. Cartman hugging his mother, that unsettling smile spreading across his face. 2 dots, a line, and a curve. That's all it takes. That's all it's ever taken with this show. The simplest possible tool, used with the most precision, to communicate something that more sophisticated art often struggles to express. I've watched that shot dozens of times now, and every time, I notice something different in it. Sometimes, I see Cartman winning, the monster reclaiming his territory. Sometimes, I see Leanne losing, the loneliness that makes her complicit in her own son's cruelty. Sometimes, I see something sadder than either of those. A kid who, for one brief moment, had a chance to be different. A chance that evaporated, not because of anything he did, but because the one person in the world who was supposed to protect him needed him to stay broken. That's South Park, not the controversy, not the shock value, not the 162 shits, or the celebrity takedowns, or the construction paper animation. It's the tiny, devastating moments hidden inside the chaos. The ones that hit you 3 days later while you're doing the dishes. The ones nobody talks about. So the next time someone tells you South Park is just a crude cartoon, tell them about Butters in the Rain. Tell them about Stan's bottle of Jameson. Tell them about Cartman's smile. Tell them about the counter in the corner of the screen and the credits full of John Smiths, and the griefer sitting alone in his apartment while Paul Stanley sings about living to win. Or don't tell them anything, just let them watch it, and trust that they'll find the genius hiding in the margins. The same way you did, the same way I did, the same way millions of people have been finding it since August 13th, 1997. But I'm not done yet, not even close, because there's so much more hiding in this show that I need to tell you about. I said I'd wrap up, but I realize there are too many things I haven't covered that I need to talk about. Get comfortable again, because we've got more ground to cover. And honestly, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, in a good way. I want to talk about the Cartoon Wars two-parter, because I think it contains the single most important statement South Park has ever made about free speech, and it's buried inside a parody of Family Guy. Season 10, Episodes 3 and 4, Cartoon Wars Part 1 aired April 5th, 2006, and Cartoon Wars Part 2 aired April 12th, 2006. Written and directed by Trey Parker. These episodes were inspired by the Jyllands Posten Muhammad cartoons controversy. In September 2005, a Danish newspaper had published editorial cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad, and it triggered protests, riots, and violent demonstrations across the Islamic world. Now, the surface-level plot of Cartoon Wars is about whether Family Guy should air an episode featuring Muhammad. The town of South Park panics. Cartman pretends to be offended on behalf of Muslims as a scheme to get Family Guy canceled because he hates the show. And Kyle makes the case for free expression. There's a great subplot where Cartman meets Bart Simpson, and the two bond over their mutual hatred of Family Guy. After the episodes aired, Parker and Stone said the staff of The Simpsons contacted them to praise the Family Guy takedown, and the King of the Hill team told them, "You're doing God's work." Seth MacFarlane himself called the episodes funny and accurate, which is either incredibly gracious or slightly masochistic. I'm not sure which. But here's the genius that nobody talks about. The real battle in Cartoon Wars wasn't between the characters. It was between the show's creators and their own network. Parker and Stone wanted to actually depict Muhammad in the episode. Comedy Central refused. The network felt it was a safety concern. And Parker and Stone argued, correctly, that the network was giving in to hypothetical violence. That refusing to show Muhammad because someone might get angry was the exact capitulation that terrorism is designed to achieve. Their frustration was so intense that they wrote the network's interference directly into the storyline. In the finished episode, at the moment Muhammad is supposed to appear on the fictional Family Guy episode, a black title card appears reading that Comedy Central has refused to broadcast the image. And here's what's devastating about that. The episode is about the free speech implications of censoring Muhammad, and the episode itself was censored. The medium became the message. The thing the episode warned against, surrendering to the threat of violence by preemptively silencing expression, happened to the episode, in real time, on the air. And Parker and Stone left the evidence of the censorship visible. They didn't pretend it didn't happen. They showed you the scar. Kyle's speech in Part 2 is one of the most sincere things the show has ever produced. I'm going to paraphrase rather than quote directly, but the essence is, if you don't show Muhammad, then you've made a distinction between what's okay to mock and what isn't. And once you do that, any group that wants to be exempt from criticism just has to threaten violence. Catholics don't want you mocking Jesus, just threaten violence. Scientologists don't want you mocking Xenu? Same deal. The principle of free expression means nothing if it only applies to things that are safe to say. The whole point is that it protects the dangerous stuff, the stuff that makes people angry, because that's the stuff that most needs protection. And then the terrorists' retaliation in the episode is a crude animation showing Jesus defecating on George Bush and the American flag. And the Catholic League's William Donahue called Parker and Stone little whores for the Jesus scene, completely missing the point. They weren't mocking Jesus. They were demonstrating Comedy Central's double standard. Showing Jesus in a degrading scenario? No problem. Showing Muhammad in any scenario? Banned. The hypocrisy is the joke. I think about this a lot because it represents something rare in television. A show that isn't just willing to fight for its principles, but willing to document its own defeats in real time. They lost the battle with Comedy Central. Muhammad was censored, but they showed you the censorship, named the censor, and explained why it mattered. That's braver than getting away with it would have been. And there's a coda to this story that makes it even more complicated. Episodes 200 and 201 from season 14 in 2010 revisited the Muhammad controversy. By this point, Parker and Stone had received actual death threats from a radical Islamic website. 201 was so heavily censored by Comedy Central that large portions of dialogue were bleeped, including Kyle's entire closing speech, which apparently didn't even mention Muhammad. The network just bleeped everything to be safe. 5 South Park episodes, Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200, and 201, have never been made available for streaming. They're not on Max. They're not on Paramount Plus. They exist only on physical DVD and Blu-ray releases. In a show of over 300 episodes, 5 have been effectively erased from the digital record, and all 5 involve the same subject. Free speech advocates can debate whether those episodes should be available. That's a legitimate conversation. But what's not debatable is that South Park, a show accused of nihilism and both sidesism, was willing to risk the physical safety of its creators to make a point about censorship, and then got censored, and documented the censorship, and got censored again. That's not nihilism. That's principle. Messy, complicated, imperfect principle, but principle nonetheless. Let me talk about Randy Marsh now, because I think his character arc is one of the most underappreciated long-form achievements in television comedy, and nobody analyzes it properly, because everybody's too busy laughing at him bouncing on his inflated testicles. Randy starts the show as a background character. In the first few seasons, he's just Stan's dad. He's a geologist. He shows up occasionally to be a concerned parent. He has maybe 5 lines per episode. If you go back and watch season 1, you'd never guess this guy would become arguably the show's most popular character. But something happens around season 9 or 10. You can feel the writers falling in love with Randy. He starts getting more screen time, more plot lines, more absurdity, and the character evolves from a mild-mannered family man into the most spectacularly unhinged adult in a town full of spectacularly unhinged adults. The thing about Randy is that he's not crazy in a random way. His insanity has a very specific pattern. He takes whatever the current cultural trend is and commits to it with a fervor that exposes how insane the trend is. The Tegrity Farms arc, where Randy becomes a marijuana farmer, is really about the hypocrisy of the cannabis legalization movement and the transformation of counterculture rebellion into corporate enterprise. The Lorde subplot, where Randy secretly is the pop singer Lorde, is about middle-aged identity crisis, wrapped in commentary about manufactured pop culture. The Broadway Bro Down episode, where Randy discovers that Broadway musicals contain hidden subliminal messages, is, okay, that one is just insane. But my point stands. What makes Randy genius is that he represents something real about a certain kind of American man. He's the guy who's always finding himself. He's the guy who's always having an awakening. He's the guy who throws himself into every new identity with total sincerity, only to burn out and find the next thing. He's not a bad person. He's not even a stupid person. He's a person who can't sit still, who can't accept that life might just be fine, who needs drama, needs stakes, needs to feel like he's in the middle of something important. And because of that, he turns every minor occurrence into an existential crisis. And the slow motion transformation of Randy from straight man to wild card happened so organically that it almost felt accidental, but it wasn't. Parker and Stone have talked in interviews about how Randy gradually became one of their favorite characters because he could carry storylines that the boys couldn't. The boys are 8. There are limits to the situations they can plausibly be involved in. Randy, as an adult, has access to the full range of human absurdity. He can start businesses. He can have affairs. He can enter competitive cooking shows. He can fake a medical condition to get a marijuana prescription. The character's expanding role wasn't a creative decision, so much as a creative discovery. They realized that the most interesting character on their show about children was someone's dad. And here's the part nobody talks about. The show's shift toward Randy-centric episodes is fundamentally connected to its creators getting older. Parker and Stone were in their late 20s when South Park started. By the time Randy became a main character, they were in their late 30s and early 40s. They were dads themselves. They couldn't relate to the boys the way they used to, but they could relate to Randy, this middle-aged man trying to stay relevant, trying to find meaning, trying not to become his own father. The show's evolution mirrors its creators' lives, and Randy is the vessel through which that evolution manifests. When you watch Randy Marsh, you're watching Trey Parker and Matt Stone get older. You're watching them reckon with adulthood through the most ridiculous character imaginable. Medicinal Fried Chicken, Season 14, Episode 3, aired March 31st, 2010. That's the episode where Randy and his friends intentionally make themselves sick to qualify for medical marijuana prescriptions. And the physical results are grotesquely exaggerated in the most South Park way possible. And the B-plot has Cartman running an illegal KFC operation in a perfect Scarface parody after KFC gets banned in Colorado. Both plotlines are flawless. The Randy story is physically absurd. The image of him bouncing down the street like he's riding a space hopper is burned into my memory forever, but it's underpinned by razor-sharp commentary on the absurdity of marijuana legislation. He's not getting high because he wants to get high. He's getting sick because the system has made it easier to develop a medical condition than to access a recreational drug. The bureaucracy is more insane than anything happening on screen. That's the joke. The system is more absurd than the absurdity. I want to circle back to something else now, because I realize I haven't talked about a genius moment that I promised I'd cover, and it's connected to the way South Park handles continuity. For most of its run, seasons 1 through 17, roughly, South Park was aggressively episodic. Each episode reset to 0. Kenny died and came back. Plotlines resolved or evaporated. Nothing carried over. This was a deliberate choice. Parker and Stone believed that serialized storytelling was for dramas, not comedies. They wanted each episode to be self-contained. And then, season 18 happened. In 2014, South Park went fully serialized for the first time. Every episode connected to the next. Plot lines carried over. Character development persisted. And it was polarizing. Some fans loved it. Others felt like it lost the anarchic, anything-goes energy that made the show special. The show would bounce between serialized and episodic approaches over the next several seasons, never quite settling on one format. But here's the thing that I think is genuinely brilliant about this period, and it's something I've never seen anyone articulate. The serialization experiment was South Park doing exactly what it had always done, reflecting the cultural moment. In 2014, prestige television was at its peak. Breaking Bad had ended in 2013. Game of Thrones was dominating the cultural conversation. The golden age of serialized storytelling had made episodic comedies feel quaint. And South Park, a show that had always absorbed and reflected the culture around it, absorbed the idea that television should tell longer, more complex stories. It tried on serialization like Randy Marsh tries on A New Identity. And like Randy, it went all in for a while, then stepped back, then found a hybrid approach. The Imagination Land trilogy from 2007 was actually the seed of this. That 3-part story, which started production 3 months before it aired and was originally conceived as a theatrical film, showed Parker and Stone that they could tell longer stories within the South Park framework. They liked it. They wanted to do more. And years later, when the culture was demanding serialization, they were ready. The trilogy wasn't just a great set of episodes. It was a proof of concept for the show's entire future. And you know what? I think the show's current approach, loose serialization with some episodes standing alone and others building toward larger arcs, is actually the best version of South Park. It has the anarchic energy of the early episodic years and the emotional weight of the serialized experiments. It's the show that had to evolve in order to stay the same, like its own animation, constantly advancing technology used to deliberately recreate the look of something primitive. The contradiction is the point. Okay, I've been going for a long time now, and I want to make sure I cover a few more specific genius moments before we close out. The Tweek X Craig episode, Season 19, Episode 6, aired October 28th, 2015. This one is genius for a reason that extends beyond the show itself. In the episode, the town of South Park decides that Tweek and Craig are a gay couple, based on Asian artwork depicting them together. The boys aren't actually in a relationship, but the town's assumptions become reality through social pressure. And here's the meta genius. Before the episode aired, Parker and Stone asked South Park fans online to submit original fan art of Tweek and Craig as a couple. Actual fan-submitted art was used in the episode. The fans literally drew the images that the fictional town sees and reacts to. The boundary between the show and its audience didn't just blur, it dissolved. The fans became the content. The community became the joke, and the joke's creator simultaneously. And then, in subsequent episodes, Tweek and Craig actually became a couple. The joke became canon. The ironic commentary on how fandom creates reality became a real example of fandom creating reality. It's recursive in a way that makes my head spin, and the relationship has been handled with genuine tenderness in later seasons. What started as satire became one of the show's most authentic love stories. I don't even know what to call that. It's either the most cynical thing the show has ever done or the most sincere. Probably both. Awesome O, Season 8, Episode 2, aired April 14th, 2004. Cartman disguises himself as a robot to spy on Butters and discover embarrassing secrets. But what actually happens is that Butters, thinking he's talking to a robot, opens up completely. He shares his fears, his hopes, his loneliness, and Cartman, trapped in his robot costume, has to listen to all of it without being able to exploit it. For once in his life, Cartman is forced to be present with another person's vulnerability without using it as a weapon. And the twist is beautiful. The embarrassing secret Cartman was trying to discover? Butters has a video of Cartman dressed as Britney Spears, dancing with a cardboard cutout of Justin Timberlake. The spy becomes the exposed. But the genius moment is smaller than all of that. It's the scenes where Butters talks to Awesome O at bedtime. He tells the robot about his day. He asks it questions. He treats it with kindness and genuine affection. And because it's Butters, because it's always Butters, the moments are heartbreaking. This kid is so lonely, so starved for a connection that doesn't come with conditions, that he forms a deeper bond with a fake robot than he has with any human in his life. And the robot is Cartman, the one person least capable of reciprocating that vulnerability. It's a tragedy disguised as a fart joke, disguised as a sci-fi parody. Layers upon layers upon layers. Let me do a few more rapid-fire genius moments that don't get enough love. The Pip episode, Season 4, Episode 5, aired November 29th, 2000. A South Park retelling of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, narrated by guest star Malcolm McDowell as a British person, with no involvement from any of the regular South Park characters. This episode is widely considered one of the worst by fans, and I get it. It's jarring, it's weird, it doesn't feel like the show, but I think that's why it's secretly genius. Parker and Stone were testing the limits of what South Park could be. Could it be a literary adaptation? Could it work without Cartman, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny? The answer was mostly no, but the willingness to try, the confidence to throw out an episode that was essentially an experimental short film during the middle of their 4th season, tells you everything about how they think about the show. It's not precious to them, it's a playground. Margaritaville, Season 13, Episode 3, aired March 25th, 2009. In the middle of the Great Recession, Randy Marsh decides the economy crashed because Americans spent too lavishly, and begins leading a movement of extreme frugality. Meanwhile, Kyle buys everyone's debts with a Platinum American Express card, sacrificing himself for the community's financial sins. The episode is a parallel to the story of Jesus. Kyle is literally crucified in the mall with his credit card bill. The whole thing is a deeply intelligent satire of both economic populism and the quasi-religious way Americans talk about the market. The economy isn't treated as a system. It's treated as a deity that must be appeased. And the solution isn't rational policy. It's sacrifice and faith. This episode won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2009. It beat The Simpsons, Family Guy, and King of the Hill. And I think it's one of the most politically sophisticated things the show has ever done, because it doesn't take sides. It doesn't say the bailouts were wrong or the bailouts were right. It says the entire framework through which Americans understand economics is fundamentally religious in nature. We worship the market. We sacrifice to it. We blame ourselves when it punishes us. And that insight delivered through a cartoon about a 10-year-old being crucified in a South Park mall, is worth more than most cable news analysis. The Hobbit, Season 17, Episode 10. The season finale aired December 11th, 2013. In this episode, Wendy tries to fight back against photoshopped images that set unrealistic beauty standards, while Kanye West's defense of Kim Kardashian's photoshopped image becomes an increasingly surreal running subplot. The episode ends with Wendy, defeated, photoshopping her own picture to conform to the standards she was fighting against. She sits at her computer, alone, and does it, and the show ends. No resolution, no moral, no victory. Just a teenage girl surrendering to a pressure she can't beat in a room by herself with nobody watching. And I think about that ending a lot because it's one of the few times South Park ends on a note of pure defeat. Not comic defeat, not ironic defeat. Real, genuine, this is how the world works defeat. The system won, the individual lost, and the show doesn't pretend otherwise. It doesn't offer a but, actually. She inspired change. Coda. It doesn't have Kyle deliver a speech about inner beauty. It just shows you the moment a person gives up and trusts that you understand why it matters. That's the kind of moment I'm talking about when I say genius moments nobody talks about. Not the spectacle, not the controversy, not the $100 million deal or the Emmy wins or the censorship battles. The quiet moments. The ones that sit with you. The ones that come back to you at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep and your brain decides to remind you of a scene from a cartoon you watched 3 years ago. South Park has been on the air since August 13th, 1997, almost 29 years. In that time, it's produced over 300 episodes, won 5 Emmy Awards, been nominated for an Oscar, been the subject of government investigations by the Church of Scientology, been threatened by terrorist organizations, been censored by its own network, been accused of nihilism, and praised for its moral clarity, been declared dead approximately 47 times, and continued to air new episodes that people actually watch and argue about. That's not a television show. That's a cultural institution, an ugly, foul-mouthed construction paper institution. And the genius, the real genius, the one that makes everything else possible, is that after all of that, after nearly 3 decades and hundreds of controversies, and billions of words written about it, the show can still surprise you. It can still make you laugh at something you shouldn't laugh at. It can still show you something about the world you hadn't noticed. It can still break your heart with 2 dots and a line. I keep coming back to those dots. Those simple, stupid dots that make up every face in the show. Eyes that are just circles. Mouths that are just lines. The most reductive representation of a human face possible. And somehow, through the alchemy of voice acting and writing and timing and that strange, irreducible thing we call craft, somehow those dots make you feel things, real things, things you carry with you. The last image I want to leave you with tonight is from Raisins. Butters, sitting in the rain, crying. His face is a circle with 2 dots and a line, and the line is curved slightly downward. That's it. That's the visual representation of a broken heart in South Park. A circle with 2 dots and a line curved slightly downward. And I dare you to look at it and not feel something, because that's the genius nobody talks about. Not the satire, not the controversy, not the cultural impact, or the production speed, or the animation revolution. The genius of South Park is that it makes you care about dots. Thank you for spending this time with me. I know it was a long one, maybe one of the longest we've done on this channel. And if you're still here, I want you to know that I see you. I appreciate you. These videos exist because people like you watch them and share them and come back for more. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It genuinely helps us keep making these for you. And share this with someone who dismisses South Park as just a crude cartoon. They might be surprised at what they find underneath. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. But before I get to those final moments, let me spend some time on something that fascinates me endlessly. South Park's relationship with its own legacy. Here's what I mean. Most long-running shows accumulate continuity like sediment. The Simpsons has 3 decades of references to itself. Family Guy has built-in callbacks to its own jokes. But South Park has a stranger, more complicated relationship with its own history, because the show's continuity is simultaneously incredibly detailed and deliberately broken. On one hand, South Park has some of the most meticulous continuity in television. Cartman's father being revealed as Scott Tenorman's father in 201, Season 14, Episodes 5 and 6, aired in April 2010, recontextualizes Scott Tenorman Must Die from Season 5. That's a narrative callback spanning 9 seasons and 9 years. It means that when Cartman fed Scott his parents in the chili, he was unknowingly feeding his own half-brother their shared biological father. The most evil thing Cartman has ever done becomes even more twisted in retrospect. And Parker and Stone have said they planned that connection. It wasn't a retcon. They knew when they wrote Scott Tenorman Must Die in 2001 that Jack Tenorman was Cartman's father. They sat on that information for 9 years. On the other hand, the show constantly contradicts its own timeline. The boys have been in 4th grade for over 25 years. Kenny dies and comes back without explanation for most of the series. Characters age in some episodes and don't age in others. Real-world time passes. References to current events make clear the show is set in the present, but the characters remain frozen. It's Schrodinger's continuity, simultaneously real and not real, depending on what the story requires. And I think that tension between caring deeply about continuity and freely ignoring it is actually one of the show's core artistic statements, because that's how memory works. That's how people experience time. We remember certain things with crystalline precision and forget others entirely. We carry some events with us forever while letting years vanish without a trace. South Park's continuity reflects human consciousness, not calendar time. The things that matter persist. The things that don't disappear. And who decides what matters? The storyteller. Always the storyteller. There's a concept in literary theory called the unreliable narrator, and I think South Park itself is an unreliable narrator of its own history. It remembers what serves the current story. It forgets what doesn't, and it never apologizes for the discrepancies. I think that's more honest than most fiction manages to be. Let me shift to another topic I've been wanting to cover tonight: the way South Park handles death. Not Kenny's death. Everyone talks about that. I mean the way the show deals with real, permanent death. Because when South Park kills someone and means it, the results are devastating. Chef Isaac Hayes, Season 10, Episode 1, The Return of Chef, aired March 22nd, 2006. I talked about this earlier in the context of the Scientology controversy, but I want to focus on the death scene itself now, because it's one of the most emotionally complex moments the show has ever produced. Chef, who has been brainwashed by the Super Adventure Club, an obvious stand-in for Scientology, falls off a bridge, is struck by lightning, catches fire, gets impaled on a tree branch, and is then mauled by a mountain lion and a grizzly bear simultaneously. It's one of the most over-the-top death sequences in animation history. It's gratuitous in a way that only South Park can be. And then Kyle speaks, and what he says, paraphrasing here, is that they shouldn't be angry at Chef. They should be angry at the organization that scrambled his brain. Chef was their friend. Chef was a good person. And what happened to him wasn't his fault. And if you know the real-world context, if you know that Isaac Hayes didn't willingly leave the show, that his Scientologist handlers may have issued the resignation statement without his knowledge while he was recovering from a stroke, Kyle's speech becomes something else entirely. It becomes Parker and Stone saying goodbye to a friend they lost to an institution. Not to Isaac Hayes the man, but to the version of Isaac Hayes that Scientology created. The version that turned against them. They're mourning their friend while acknowledging that their friend was taken from them by something he couldn't control. The death of Chef is played for laughs. The eulogy is played completely straight. And the coexistence of those two tones, the absurd violence and the genuine grief, is something only South Park could pull off. Most shows choose one register or the other. South Park refuses to choose, because in real life, loss is absurd and devastating. Death is meaningless, and the most meaningful thing that ever happens. You can laugh and grieve at the same time. The show insists on it. There's another death in the show that I think deserves more attention, and it's one that most people have forgotten. Kenny's real death. Not the gag deaths, the real one. Season 5, Episode 13, Kenny Dies, aired December 5th, 2001. Kenny gets diagnosed with a terminal illness and actually dies. For real. He doesn't come back the next episode. He's gone for all of Season 6. The first time in the show's history that a major character was absent for an entire season. And Kenny Dies is played completely straight. No comedy, no gag. Stan can't handle visiting Kenny in the hospital. Kyle cries at his bedside. Cartman, in one of the only moments of genuine emotion the character has ever displayed, appears to be devastated, though it turns out he's actually more upset about his stem cell research project being shut down. But for most of the episode, even Cartman's grief reads as real, and the show lets it breathe. It doesn't rush past the sadness. It sits in it. It gives you time to feel what these characters are feeling, which is the terror of losing a friend at an age when you can't understand death. Kyle's hospital scenes are some of the most difficult South Park has ever produced. An 8-year-old sitting next to his dying friend, not knowing what to say. The visual simplicity of the animation makes it worse. You can't hide behind detailed facial expressions or realistic tears. It's just a kid sitting there, 2 dots and a line, in a hospital room, watching another pair of dots and a line fade away, and it wrecks you. Kenny came back in the season 6 finale. Red Sleigh Down aired December 11th, 2002, and the show never fully explained how or why. It just happened. Kenny was back. The world moved on. But Kenny Dies happened, and it matters, and the show was brave enough to treat its longest-running joke as a tragedy and see what happened. What happened was one of the most emotionally honest episodes the show has ever made. I want to talk about one more thing before we really do close out, and it's something I've been thinking about for months. I call it the South Park paradox. It goes like this. South Park is a show that argues, consistently, that caring too much about things is foolish. It mocks passionate activists, zealous believers, and self-righteous crusaders of every political stripe. Its central message, if you had to distill it to one sentence, might be, nothing matters as much as you think it does. And yet, the show itself is made by people who care enormously, who pull all-nighters, who fight network executives over principles, who pour their hearts into tiny character details that most viewers will never notice, who spent 3 months hand-cutting paper to make a pilot that no one was guaranteed to see. The show preaches detachment and practices obsession. It tells you not to care while caring more deeply than almost any other show on television. And I think that contradiction isn't a flaw. It's the engine that drives everything. Parker and Stone are the most passionately anti-passion people in comedy. They care about telling you not to care. And that tension between the coolness of the message and the intensity of the craft is what gives South Park its unique energy. It's cool and hot at the same time, detached and engaged, nihilistic and principled, both at once, always. And maybe that's why the show has lasted nearly 30 years, when so many of its contemporaries have faded. Not because it found the right answer, but because it found the right contradiction. The show that doesn't take anything seriously takes itself very, very seriously. And it trusts you to hold both of those truths simultaneously. That's the genius nobody talks about. Not any single episode, not any single joke. The genius is the contradiction itself. The genius is the gap between what South Park says and what South Park is. And in that gap, in the space between the message and the craft, the show has created something that feels, somehow, more honest than anything that commits to just one approach. I actually have one more thought, and then I promise I'll let you sleep. You know what moment in South Park gets to me more than any other? It's not from any of the episodes I've been discussing. It's from the documentary, 6 Days to Air. There's a scene near the end, after the episode has been delivered, after the all-nighter is over, after the animators and writers have gone home. And Trey Parker is sitting alone in the studio, and he watches the episode air, and he looks empty, not satisfied, not proud, not even relieved, really, just empty. Like a man who has poured everything he has into something and now has nothing left. And I think about that shot every time I hear someone say, South Park is lazy. Every time someone calls it crude or simple or thoughtless. There's a man in that shot who has just sacrificed a week of his life to make 22 minutes of television that he isn't even sure is good, who will do it again next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, for decades. That's not genius in the abstract. That's genius as a verb. Genius as labor. Genius as showing up and doing the work when you're too tired to think straight, when you're not sure it matters, when the thing you've made looks like construction paper cutouts that a child might produce, and doing it anyway, because the alternative is not doing it. And not doing it would mean that the dots and the lines and the crude little faces would stop making people feel things, and the world would be a slightly less interesting place without them. So here's to the dots, here's to the lines, here's to 29 years of construction paper and all-nighters and fart jokes that secretly contain more emotional intelligence than most prestige dramas. Here's to Kenny dying, here's to Butters in the Rain, here's to Cartman's smile, here's to Stan's bottle of whiskey. Here's to a show that argued it didn't matter while mattering more than it was ever supposed to. And while we're here, let me talk about a few more things I haven't been able to get out of my head, because I realized I've been doing this show a disservice by not talking about its music. Trey Parker is, and I say this without exaggeration, one of the most talented musical comedians of his generation. The man co-wrote The Book of Mormon, which won 9 Tony Awards. He wrote Blame Canada for the 1999 movie, which was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. At the ceremony, he and Matt Stone showed up wearing dresses. Parker wore the same green Versace dress Jennifer Lopez had worn to the Grammys, and Stone wore a pink dress. They'd both taken acid before the ceremony, because of course they had. But the music inside the show, the stuff that never gets released as singles, the stuff that lives and dies within individual episodes, is where Parker's musical genius really shows. Take Kyle's Mom's a Bitch from the original movie. Take the Les Miserables parody La Resistance from the same film. Take the Randy Marsh original songs, or Mr. Hankey's Christmas classics, or Cartman's various musical outbursts. Each one is a perfectly crafted pastiche of a specific musical genre, executed with enough technical precision that it would work as an actual song, while simultaneously being completely absurd in context. Here's a specific example that kills me every time. In the movie, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, released June 30th, 1999, there's a song called What Would Brian Boitano Do? It's a power ballad about the boys seeking guidance from an unlikely source, Olympic figure skater Brian Boitano, and it's structured exactly like an inspirational montage song from an 80s action movie. The melody is genuinely stirring, the orchestration is genuinely dramatic, and the lyrics are about a figure skater karate chopping grizzly bears and building pyramids and traveling through time. The gap between the sincerity of the music and the absurdity of the lyrics is where the comedy lives. But, and this is what nobody talks about, if you stripped away the silly lyrics and kept the melody and arrangement, you'd have a legitimately moving piece of music. Parker doesn't write parodies of good songs. He writes good songs and makes them parodies through content. The craft is real, only the surface is ironic. That same principle applies throughout the show. Put It Down, from season 21, the Tweek and Craig song, about North Korea and nuclear anxiety, is a perfectly constructed pop duet. Safe Space, from season 19, is a pitch-perfect Lorde-style anthem about the desire to exist without criticism. Each musical number earns its comedy, not by mocking music, but by demonstrating a genuine understanding of how music works, and then deploying that understanding in service of something ridiculous. And I think this connects to something deeper about South Park's genius. The show respects craft. Even when it's mocking something, it mocks it by being good at it. The Family Guy takedown in Cartoon Wars works because Parker and Stone actually understand comedy writing well enough to articulate why they think Family Guy's approach falls short. The Scientology episode works because they actually read and understood the church's beliefs well enough to present them accurately. The World of Warcraft episode works because they actually played the game and collaborated with the developers. South Park never punches down from a position of ignorance. It always does the homework first. Matt Stone said something in an interview once that I think about a lot. He said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, that the worst thing you can be in their writer's room is someone who hasn't really looked into the thing they want to mock. They don't respect lazy satire. If you're going to go after something, you need to understand it first. Mockery without understanding is just bullying. Mockery with understanding is satire. And the difference between the two is the difference between a forgettable cheap shot and an episode that changes how people see an institution. I think that's why the Caesar Millen thing in Tist works so well. Matt Stone watched The Dog Whisperer obsessively. He understood Millen's methods. He believed they would actually work on Cartman. And Millan himself, watching the episode, confirmed that the writers had accurately depicted his techniques. The satire comes from taking something seriously and following its logic to an absurd conclusion, not from misrepresenting it. And this brings me to what I think is the single most underrated genius moment in the entire run of South Park. And it's something so small that I'm almost embarrassed to bring it up. But I can't stop thinking about it, so here goes. In the pilot episode, Cartman gets an anal probe, August 13th, 1997. There's a scene at Cartman's house where he's eating dinner. His cat keeps going after his pot pie, and Cartman yells at his mom to complain, using a word that no 8-year-old should know, one he clearly doesn't understand the meaning of. And his mom, Leanne, replies in that sweet, oblivious voice of hers, "Well then, I know a certain kitty who's sleeping with mommy tonight. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about." Okay. Surface level, it's a crude joke. An 8-year-old throwing around adult language he has no context for, and his mom giving a response that inadvertently reveals way too much about her personal life. Standard South Park shock humor. But think about what that exchange establishes in 30 seconds. It tells you that Cartman's mom enables his bad behavior. It tells you that Cartman uses adult language without understanding it. It tells you that his household has no boundaries. It tells you that Leanne Cartman's relationship with her son is fundamentally unhealthy in ways that neither of them recognizes. And it does all of this through a joke about a cat wanting pot pie. That's the first episode, the very first episode of the series. And it already contains the DNA of everything the show will become. Cartman's entitlement, Leanne's enabling, the gap between what children say and what it means, the way adult dysfunction shapes childhood without anyone noticing. It's all there in one throwaway line, in a show that critics said was devoid of subtext. Devoid of subtext. I still can't believe someone wrote that. Let me give you one more deep cut, and then we really are done. Season 7, Episode 15. It's Christmas in Canada. Aired December 17th, 2003. The plot, the boys travel to Canada to bring back Kyle's adopted brother Ike after his birth parents reclaim him. They meet various Canadians along the way. The episode parodies The Wizard of Oz. Standard South Park adventure. But there's a moment near the end where Kyle confronts the new Prime Minister of Canada, who turns out to be Saddam Hussein in disguise. And Kyle is furious because he's been on this whole journey, and it's Christmas, and all he wants is his brother back. And he says, and I won't quote exactly, but the energy is unmistakable, that all he wants is his family together for Christmas, and nobody should have the right to take that away. It's a tiny moment. It's played quickly, but it's one of the only times in the entire series where Kyle's Jewishness and his celebration of Christmas coexist without comment. The show doesn't make a joke about it. It doesn't have anyone point out the irony. It just lets Kyle, a Jewish kid, want Christmas with his family, because that's how assimilation works in real life. You celebrate the holidays of the culture you live in, regardless of your religious background, because holidays aren't really about religion, they're about family. And South Park, a show that has built entire episodes around mocking religious hypocrisy, understands that better than most earnest dramas about the holiday season. That's the kind of thing I notice on my 5th or 6th rewatch. The kind of thing that makes me think South Park might be the most intelligent show on television, not despite its crude surface, but because of it. The crude surface is camouflage. It's armor. It's the thing that lets the show say true things without being accused of pretentiousness. Nobody expects profundity from a show that says shit 162 times. And because nobody expects it, the profundity hits harder when it arrives. I've been making videos about animated shows for a while now, and I think South Park is the one that rewards rewatching the most. Not because it has the most hidden Easter eggs, or the most complex plotting, though it has plenty of both, but because the show's intelligence is distributed differently than most television. In a prestige drama, the intelligence is up front. You know you're watching something smart. The cinematography tells you. The pacing tells you. The marketing tells you. With South Park, the intelligence is hiding behind fart jokes and paper cutouts and children screaming profanity. You have to dig for it. You have to trust that it's there. And when you find it, when you catch the 3-second expression change on Cartman's face, or the throwaway line that recontextualizes an entire character, or the structural choice that mirrors the theme it's exploring, the discovery feels personal, like you earned it, like the show was waiting for you to notice. And I think that's why South Park fans are so passionate. Not because the show tells them what to think, it explicitly doesn't, but because it rewards paying attention. It respects its audience enough to hide its best work. Most shows put their intelligence on display. South Park puts it in a drawer and lets you find it. And since I'm still here, and you're still here, let me tell you about Woodland Critter Christmas, because the production story behind this episode might be the single best illustration of how South Park's creative process works, and why pressure, not comfort, produces genius. Season 8, Episode 14, aired December 15th, 2004. This was the season finale, and it came at the end of the most exhausting year Parker and Stone had ever experienced. They'd been producing South Park simultaneously with their feature film Team America: World Police, which meant they were essentially working 2 full-time jobs at the same time. By the time they reached the season finale, they were running on fumes. Parker didn't want to do a Christmas special. He was afraid it wouldn't measure up to the show's other Christmas episodes, which fans genuinely loved, but they were out of time and out of options, and the season needed to end. Saturday, with the Wednesday deadline approaching, Parker told the staff to start animating Christmas critters in a forest. He didn't know what the story was yet. He was writing pages, while the animators worked on assets for scenes that hadn't been conceived. That's not a production pipeline. That's a controlled freefall. And then, that afternoon, someone in the writer's room suggested making the critters Satanists. And suddenly, the episode clicked. They incorporated a satanic ritual scene inspired by the film Event Horizon. They built the narration in the anapestic rhyming style of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And by Sunday, 3 days before air, they had the episode's final structural breakthrough: the reveal that the entire story is a tale being told by Cartman to his class, which explains why Kyle is the villain who gets possessed by the Antichrist and dies of AIDS. Parker has talked about driving home that night and spontaneously roaring, literally roaring, in his car when he realized they were going to pull it off. After a year of overlapping productions, after pushing himself past every reasonable limit, after accepting a season finale, he wasn't sure he could deliver. The adrenaline and relief came out as an animal sound. And the episode? It's become one of the most beloved in the show's entire run. The Woodland Critters came back in the Imagination Land trilogy. Fans rank it alongside Scott Tenorman Must Die and Make Love Not Warcraft. It was made in roughly 4 days. And I think about that roar a lot. Not because it's funny, though it is, but because of what it represents. It represents a creative process, built entirely on the edge. Not the edge of what's acceptable, though South Park lives there too. The edge of what's possible. The show exists in a state of permanent almost didn't make it. And that state, that terrifying proximity to failure, is what keeps the work alive. Comfortable art is safe art. South Park is never comfortable, even when the writers don't know where the episode is going. Even when the deadline is tomorrow and they've got nothing, they push through. And more often than you'd think, what comes out the other side is extraordinary. Matt Stone once said in an interview with Bill Simmons that deadlines are great for creativity, and compared their process to being the kids in college doing term papers the morning they were due. That's not just a cute anecdote, it's a production philosophy. The 6-day cycle isn't a limitation they endure, it's a creative tool they deploy. The pressure strips away overthinking. It forces intuition to the surface. It makes you commit to your first good idea instead of endlessly workshopping your way to something tepid and safe. And sometimes your first good idea is, what if the cute Christmas animals are Satanists who hold blood orgies? Most writers would second guess that. Parker and Stone don't have time to second guess anything. Let me talk about something else that's been haunting me since I started researching this video. It's about the town itself, South Park, Colorado, the setting. Because I think the show's genius extends beyond individual episodes and characters to the very architecture of its fictional world, and nobody ever talks about that. South Park, the town, functions as a microcosm of America. That's obvious. But the specific way it functions is more interesting than most people realize. The town is simultaneously tiny and infinite. It has a population small enough that everyone knows everyone, but it contains a Walmart, a Whole Foods, a shopping mall, a hospital, a military base, multiple restaurants, a sports arena, and seemingly limitless suburban sprawl. It's geographically impossible. It exists in whatever shape the story needs it to be, and that's deliberate. South Park the town is America's ID, not a realistic small town, but a projection of every American small town, containing all the institutions and contradictions of the entire country compressed into one space. When the show wants to comment on corporate culture, the town has a corporate headquarters. When it wants to comment on immigration, the town has an immigrant community. When it wants to comment on class warfare, the town has rich and poor neighborhoods that materialize as needed. The geography is emotional, not physical. The map of South Park is the map of whatever America is worried about that week. And this connects to one of the most underappreciated genius elements of the show, the way it uses recurring locations as emotional anchors. The bus stop, Cartman's basement, Stan's kitchen, Kyle's living room, These spaces never change visually. The backgrounds are identical across seasons, and that consistency creates a sense of familiarity that the show exploits ruthlessly. When something dramatic happens at the bus stop, the same bus stop where Kenny has died 100 times, the same bus stop where the boys have had 1,000 mundane conversations, it carries extra weight because you know the space. It's your space too, as a viewer. You've been there hundreds of times, and when something violates the safety of that space, you feel the violation personally. Think about how many of the show's most emotionally devastating moments happen in mundane locations. Stan drinking whiskey happens in his bedroom. Butter's rain speech happens on a sidewalk. Cartman's smile at the end of Tist happens in his kitchen. The show doesn't use dramatic locations for dramatic moments. It uses boring locations. And that ordinariness is what makes the moments land. If these things happened in a dramatic setting, on a cliff edge, in a burning building, in a rainstorm at midnight, they'd feel like television. Because they happen in kitchens and bedrooms and bus stops, they feel like life. That's a design choice. A consistent, deliberate, show-wide design choice. And nobody ever talks about it because it's invisible. It's the kind of genius that works specifically because you don't notice it. The moment you notice the technique, it stops working. So the show never draws attention to it. It just keeps putting important moments in unremarkable places and trusts that the emotional impact will take care of itself. While I'm on the subject of things that hide in plain sight, let me talk about the show's relationship with empathy, because I think South Park might be the most empathetic show on television. And I know that sounds insane, given that it regularly features children being murdered, racist stereotypes played for laughs, and graphic depictions of bodily functions that no one asked to see. But empathy isn't about being nice. Empathy is about understanding. And South Park understands its targets better than almost any other satirical show. When they go after Scientology, they first accurately present Scientology's beliefs. When they go after World of Warcraft players, they first demonstrate a genuine understanding of gaming culture. When they go after activists, politicians, or celebrities, they first inhabit those perspectives convincingly enough that you can see why people hold them. Compare this to a lot of modern satire, which often amounts to, look at these stupid people being stupid. South Park does something harder and more interesting. It shows you why people believe what they believe, and then it shows you why that belief, taken to its logical extreme, becomes absurd. It doesn't mock from the outside, it mocks from the inside. And that requires empathy, genuine empathy, for the people you're mocking. You have to understand them first. You have to see the world through their eyes. And then you have to show how that worldview, despite being understandable, leads somewhere ridiculous. The Al Gore Man-Bear-Pig storyline is actually a perfect example of this evolution. When the show first introduced Man-Bear-Pig in season 10, it was a straightforward mockery of Gore's environmental activism. Man-Bear-Pig was a fictional threat that only Gore believed in, a stand-in for what Parker and Stone seemed to consider climate change hysteria. But then, in season 22, the show brought Man-Bear-Pig back, and this time, Man-Bear-Pig was real. He was devastating the town, and the adults who had dismissed Al Gore's warnings were forced to confront the fact that the threat they'd mocked was going to destroy them. Now, a lot of people read this as Parker and Stone admitting they were wrong about climate change, and maybe that's part of it. But I think there's something more interesting happening. The show didn't just reverse its position. It examined its own earlier position with the same critical lens it applies to everything else. It asked, what if we were the ones who were wrong? What if our certainty that this wasn't a real threat was its own form of the dangerous certainty we've spent decades mocking in others? The show applied its own philosophy to itself, and the result wasn't a mea culpa. It was a story about how comfortable it is to dismiss warnings, and how devastating the consequences of that dismissal can be. That's intellectual honesty on a level that most entertainment doesn't even attempt. The willingness to revisit your own past positions, to apply your own standards of scrutiny to yourself, to say, we might have been part of the problem, that's rare. And the fact that South Park did it through the medium of a half-man, half-bear, half-pig monster destroying a cartoon town is so perfectly South Park that it makes me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I should mention, while we're on the subject of the show evolving, that there's a genius in how South Park handles its own reputation. The show knows how it's perceived. It knows people call it crude. It knows people accuse it of punching down. It knows that for every person who considers it the smartest show on television, there's another who considers it the laziest. And instead of ignoring those criticisms or defensively pushing back, the show absorbs them. It makes them part of the conversation. Cartoon Wars is partially about how people compare South Park to Family Guy. You're Getting Old is partially about whether the show has overstayed its welcome. The season 20 episodes about internet trolling and political polarization are partially about the show's own role in the culture wars it depicts. This self-awareness isn't meta for the sake of being meta. It's the show staying honest with itself, which is the same thing it demands from everyone it satirizes. If you're going to mock others for their lack of self-awareness, you'd better be willing to turn that spotlight on yourself. And South Park does, repeatedly, sometimes uncomfortably, but always with the conviction that self-examination, even when it hurts, is better than the alternative. Let me bring up one more genius moment that I've been sitting on for most of this video, because I wanted to save it for near the end. The Black Friday Trilogy, Season 17, Episodes 7 through 9, aired November 2013. This three-part storyline parodies Game of Thrones while satirizing consumer culture, brand loyalty, and the ritualistic violence of Black Friday shopping. The boys split into factions, those who want PlayStation 4 and those who want Xbox One, and the conflict escalates into a full-blown medieval war, complete with betrayals, alliances, and Red Wedding-style massacres. The obvious genius is the Game of Thrones parody, which is executed with loving precision. The costumes, the dialogue, the pacing, everything about the South Park version captures what made Game of Thrones work, while simultaneously pointing out how absurd it is when applied to 8-year-olds fighting over gaming consoles. But the deeper genius is structural. The trilogy is really about how consumer capitalism creates tribal identities. The boys don't care about the actual differences between PlayStation and Xbox. The products are functionally identical, but the choice between them becomes the basis for their entire social structure, their friendships, their enemies, their sense of self. Brand loyalty becomes ideology. Product preference becomes identity. And once it becomes identity, people will fight and die for it. Because they're not really fighting about a gaming console. They're fighting about who they are. And the show makes this point without ever explicitly stating it. There's no Kyle speech. There's no moment where someone steps back and says, "Wait, this is ridiculous." The parody does all the work. By showing you children going to war over something meaningless with the same gravity and consequence as a prestige television drama, the show demonstrates the absurdity without pointing at it. And you don't laugh because the conflict is stupid. You laugh because the conflict looks exactly like every brand war, political argument, and tribal division in your own life. The mirror is pointed at you, and the recognition is uncomfortable, and the discomfort is where the comedy lives. George R.R. Martin appears as a character in the trilogy, repeatedly trying to describe male anatomy in graphic detail instead of helping with the plot. A very specific, very funny joke about Martin's descriptive style in the books, but even that joke has layers. Because what Martin does in those scenes, derailing the serious narrative with irrelevant, self-indulgent tangents, is exactly what South Park accuses other shows of doing. Family Guy, with its cutaway gags. Modern television with its padding. The show is critiquing narrative indulgence, while indulging in its own narrative excess. And the self-awareness of that contradiction is thrilling to me. Look, I could keep going. I could talk for another 3 hours about things in South Park that nobody discusses. The way the show handles disability through Jimmy and Timmy, characters who are disabled but never defined by their disability, who are fully realized human beings whose wheelchair or speech impediment is one detail among many. The way the show uses Canada as a funhouse mirror of America, with its flapping heads and reliance on fart-based humor, which is actually a commentary on how Americans perceive other cultures. Reductive, patronizing, but also weirdly affectionate. The way Mr. Garrison's gender identity storyline, while often handled with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, does at least grapple with questions about identity that most shows refuse to touch at all. I could talk about the video games, The Stick of Truth, and The Fractured But Whole, which managed to translate the show's writing style into interactive form so successfully that they feel more like playing an episode than playing a game. About how the decision to make the player character silent while every other character is voiced creates a strange, disorienting empathy that positions you inside the South Park universe in a way the show itself never can. about how the callback to the pilot episode in The Stick of Truth connects the game to the show's origins 17 years later, closing a circle that started with construction paper and ends with a fully interactive 3D world. But I've been talking for a long time, and I promised you I'd let you sleep. So let me leave you with this. Actually, one more thing. I keep going back and forth on whether to include this, but I think it matters. There's a conversation that happens in the fandom about whether South Park has gotten worse, whether the new seasons don't measure up to the golden era, whether Parker and Stone have lost their edge. And honestly, I get where that comes from. The serialized seasons, 18, 19, 20, alienated some fans who loved the anarchic standalone energy. Some of the streaming specials have felt like the show running in a lower gear. And when you've been doing this for almost 30 years, consistency isn't just difficult, it's probably impossible. But here's what I push back against. The idea that South Park was better when it was new is really just another way of saying you were newer when you watched it. The shock of South Park Season 3, when you were 15, is different from the shock of South Park Season 27, when you're 40. Not because the show changed, because you did. And that's okay. That's literally what You're Getting Old is about. The thing that once felt electrifying now looks like shit to you. And the question isn't whether the thing actually got worse. It's whether your capacity for wonder narrowed. I think about You're Getting Old every time someone tells me South Park isn't funny anymore. Not because I think they're wrong. Maybe it isn't funny to them anymore. And that's valid. But because the show already anticipated that reaction. It already made an episode about it. It already showed you what it looks like when cynicism replaces engagement. And then it showed you a kid drinking whiskey to cope with the flatness. South Park has never been a show that promised to stay the same. It's been a show that promised to keep trying. Sometimes the trying produces genius. Sometimes it produces something forgettable. But the act of trying, of showing up every week, 6 days, start to finish, year after year after year, that's its own kind of genius. The genius of persistence. The genius of refusing to quit even when you're not sure anyone still cares. Even when you're not sure you still care. And that's the last genius nobody talks about. Not any individual moment. Not any individual episode. The genius of still being here. Of still making construction paper cutouts that make people feel things. Of still roaring like a lion in your car at midnight when you realize the episode is going to work. After all this time. After everything. Okay, now I'm done. For real this time.